The day they gathered to divide everything did not feel like a family moment. It felt more like a business meeting where emotions were carefully hidden, except for a few sharp laughs that cut deeper than words. She sat quietly on the old wooden chair near the wall, hands folded in her lap, listening as her brothers and sisters spoke loudly about money, land, and plans for the future. Every sentence reminded her how small her place had always been in the family. The house was still filled with her mother's things. The curtains smelled faintly of soap and sunlight, the same smell she remembered from childhood. On the table sat a tray of untouched tea, already going cold. No one noticed. Everyone was too busy arguing about who deserved what. She had always been the quiet one. While the others left early, chasing city jobs and modern lives, she stayed close to home. She helped their mother through long illnesses, cooked meals, cleaned rooms, and listened to old stories repeated again and again. She never complained. She never asked for anything in return. She believed that being there was enough now. Sitting in that room, sitting on that room she had been. One sibling unfolded papers and began reading out loud. The main house would be sold. The savings account would be divided equally among those present. Jewelry would be shared. Farmland near the highway would go to those who could use it properly. Each announcement was followed by nods, smiles, and quiet approval. Then came the farmhouse. The moment it was mentioned, laughter filled the room. Not kind laughter. The kind that makes you feel smaller, like you are standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone joked about broken roofs and rats. Someone else said it was only good for ghosts and spiders. Another added that no one would ever pay money for land that far from town. She felt her face warm, but she kept her eyes down. So one of them said, still smiling, "She can take the old farmhouse. It suits her, doesn't it?" More laughter followed. Heads turned toward her, waiting for a reaction. She swallowed. The farmhouse. She remembered it clearly. It sat at the edge of the land, far from the main road, surrounded by fields that had not been worked in years. The roof sagged. The windows were cracked. The doors groaned when opened. As a child, she had been warned not to play there because it was unsafe. It was also the last place. She remembered her father smiling. The others saw only a burden. To them, it was useless land. Something embarrassing. Something to get rid of. Giving it to her felt like a joke they could all enjoy. She could have argued. She could have asked for money instead. She could have reminded them of the years she spent caring for their mother while they sent short phone calls and excuses. But she did none of that. She simply nodded. "I'll take it," she said softly. The room went quiet for a moment. Then the laughter returned louder than before. Someone clapped sarcastically. Another said she was brave. Another said she was foolish. Inside, her heart felt heavy, but she did not let it show. She signed the papers without reading them carefully. Her hand shook slightly, but she kept writing. When it was done, the farmhouse was hers. No one hugged her. No one thanked her. They were already talking about dinner plans and travel schedules. To them, the matter was finished. She left the house alone. Outside, the evening air was cool. The sky was turning orange, then slowly fading into gray. She stood on the steps for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of laughter coming from inside. Then she walked away. The drive to the farmhouse took longer than she remembered. The road was narrow, cracked, and lined with tall grass. Trees leaned inward, as if watching her pass. When she finally reached the gate, she had to push it open by hand. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing across the empty land. She parked and stepped out of the car. The farmhouse stood in front of her, quiet and tired. Paint peeled from the walls. One shutter hung loose. The porch sagged under its own weight. It looked worse than she remembered. For a moment, doubt filled her chest. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she had accepted something that would only bring her pain. She took a deep breath and walked closer. The front door resisted at first, then slowly opened. Dust filled the air. The inside smelled of old wood, earth, and time. Sunlight slipped through broken curtains, lighting up floating dust particles. The floorboards creaked under her steps. She walked from room to room. The kitchen was empty except for a rusted sink and an old table. The living room had a cracked fireplace. Upstairs, the bedrooms were small and bare, their windows looking out onto wide fields that stretched farther than she had ever noticed before. She stood at one of those windows for a long time. The land was quiet, peaceful. There were no horns, no voices, no noise. Just wind moving through grass and the distant call of birds. Something in her chest loosened. This place had been ignored. Just like her. She sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall. The house was broken. Yes. It would take time, effort, and strength to fix it. She had little money and no help. But she had something else: patience. She had learned that over years of caring for others, tears finally came, slow and silent. Not because of the house, but because of everything she had never said. All the times she felt unseen. All the times she chose peace over argument. When the tears stopped, she wiped her face and stood up. "This is mine now," she whispered. She didn't know how she would fix the roof or clean the land. She didn't know how long it would take or how hard it would be. But she knew one thing for sure: she would not walk away as the sun set behind the fields. The farmhouse stood quietly, holding secrets no one else had bothered to look for. And far away, in comfortable homes and busy lives, her siblings celebrated what they believed was their victory, completely unaware that their laughter had already begun to fade. This was only the beginning. The farmhouse had been hers for a few days. Yet it still felt strange to call it home. Every corner held shadows of the past, whispers of voices long gone, and memories she had not lived herself. She spent the first morning walking from room to room, touching walls, looking under old furniture, and opening drawers that had not been disturbed for years. Dust filled the air, sticking to her skin and clothes, but she did not mind. This was the first time the farmhouse truly felt alive since her parents had left it behind. She found old journals in a corner, stacked and worn. Their pages were yellowed, ink faded, and the handwriting delicate. Reading them, she realized they were not just notes. They were stories of the family's struggles and dreams. Some spoke of hardships, of hunger during cold winters, of dreams of leaving the land for a better life. Others were lighter, filled with hopes for children, for laughter in the kitchen, for music on quiet evenings. She could feel her mother's presence in the lines, gentle and quiet, guiding her through words that had been hidden for so long. The kitchen, though empty, called her first. It smelled faintly of old wood and soap, the lingering scent of meals long past. She opened the cabinets and found chipped dishes and rusted pots. Each item told a story. Some had been used every day, others had only been brought out for holidays. She could imagine her mother, standing at the counter, humming softly while stirring a pot. She remembered similar days from her childhood and felt both joy and sorrow. Outside, the fields were untamed. Tall grass swayed in the wind, hiding paths she once ran along as a child. She stepped outside, letting the breeze touch her face, feeling the sun warm her shoulders. The farmhouse was surrounded by silence, except for birds singing in distant trees and the soft rustle of leaves. It was peaceful but also lonely. She knew this land needed care. Crops would not grow by themselves. The house would not fix itself. Yet somehow, standing there, she felt a spark of hope. She began clearing small areas, gathering fallen branches, sweeping the porch, and removing broken furniture that no one else had thought worth keeping. Each task was slow, tiring, and sometimes discouraging. The house seemed to resist her efforts. A floorboard would break under her weight. A window refused to open. The wind would knock over a stack of papers she had just organized. But she kept going, determined to see the potential hidden beneath years of neglect. Neighbors began to notice her. Some were curious, peering from a distance. Others offered advice or tools. A woman from the next farm brought fresh bread and a warm smile. A man who had lived nearby for decades stopped by to share stories of the land and the farmhouse, telling her about crops that once flourished and animals that once roamed freely. They spoke in a way that made her feel connected to something larger, a chain of life that stretched back generations. During one afternoon, she discovered a locked storage room at the back of the farmhouse. The door was heavy and worn, the key missing. She examined the lock, trying different ways to open it. After hours of effort, it finally gave way, swinging open with a loud creak. Inside, she found items that had been stored in forgotten old tools. Crates of dried seeds and boxes filled with documents. Some were letters from her father to distant relatives, discussing business, life, and love. Others were receipts, plans, and old maps of the land. Each item added layers to the story of the farmhouse, revealing a past she had only glimpsed in snippets. As she organized these items, she felt a strange connection to the people who had lived here before. They had worked hard, struggled, celebrated, and loved. Their stories were imprinted in the walls, in the floors, in the land itself. She realized that the farmhouse was more than a house. It was a vessel of memories, of life, of lessons waiting to be discovered. One evening, while sitting on the porch and watching the sun set, she felt a mix of exhaustion and contentment. The work was hard, the house challenging, but the peace she felt here was unlike anything she had known in the city or even in the main family home. She could hear the wind through the trees, smell the fresh earth, and see the sky stretch endlessly above her. It was beautiful in a way that required patience to understand. Night fell. The farmhouse seemed to sigh, settling into darkness. She lit a small lamp, letting its warm glow fill the main room. She sat with a notebook and began to write, capturing her thoughts, her plans, and even her fears. Writing made her feel grounded. It reminded her why she had accepted the farmhouse despite the ridicule. It reminded her that she had a choice, and she had chosen to embrace it, to make it hers. As days turned into weeks, she discovered more about the farmhouse. Hidden behind panels were old family photographs, some damaged but others surprisingly intact. They showed her parents, her siblings as children, and even ancestors she had never known. The faces in the pictures smiled, frowned, and looked serious. Seeing them made her feel a mix of emotions, longing, sadness, but also a sense of belonging. She realized that this farmhouse was a bridge to her family's past, a place where stories and memories could be honored rather than ignored. One morning, she found a small notebook tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace. It contained sketches of the farmhouse, drawn by her father years ago. The drawings included notes about repairs, plans for improvements, and even ideas for planting gardens. It was as if he had known someone would eventually take care of the house, someone who would understand its value. She felt a connection to him she had never known while he was alive. His care, thoughtfulness, and hope for the future were all there in those pages. With each discovery, she began to see the farmhouse differently. What had once seemed broken and useless now felt full of possibilities. She made plans to repair the roof, clean the fields, and restore rooms one by one. The work was daunting, but she was determined. Each small victory, a cleaned window, a mended fence, a cleared path, brought a sense of accomplishment and pride. She also began to learn the rhythm of the land. She noticed where the sun hit the fields first in the morning, where the wind was strongest in the afternoon, and how the soil changed across the property. She started small gardening projects, planting herbs and vegetables, learning what would grow and what would not. Slowly, the farmhouse and land began to respond to her care. It was not just a house anymore, it was a home in the truest sense. Throughout this time, she also reflected on her siblings' laughter. Their mockery still stung, but now it was accompanied by a quiet resolve. She knew they had underestimated her and the value of the farmhouse. She had once accepted the house quietly, perhaps even reluctantly, but now she felt empowered. Every day spent here, every discovery made, was a step toward a life she could claim on her own terms. Evenings were often spent on the porch, watching the stars emerge. The sky was vast and endless, filled with constellations she had learned about from her mother's stories. The farmhouse, once dark and intimidating, now felt safe and protective. It was a place where she could dream, plan, and rebuild her life in a way no one else could understand. She realized that this farmhouse, though laughed at and dismissed, had become her sanctuary. One rainy afternoon, As she sat by the window, listening to drops hitting the roof, she discovered an old trunk in the attic. Inside were clothes, blankets, and linens, all carefully folded. She also found a stack of letters written but never sent. Some addressed to relatives far away, others to friends she had never met. Reading them, she could feel the emotions of the writer: love, regret, hope, and longing. It was as if the farmhouse itself was speaking to her, telling her to honor these lives by caring for what remained. As the seasons began to change, she continued to restore the farmhouse and the land. Each day brought new challenges and new rewards. Broken fences were repaired, gardens planted, and walls cleaned. She even began painting the rooms, adding color and warmth where there had once been only gray and dust. The farmhouse slowly transformed, becoming a reflection of her determination and care. She began to meet more neighbors, who shared not only tools and advice but also stories of the past. They told her about the family who once lived here, the festivals held on the land, the animals that roamed freely. She listened carefully, absorbing every detail, feeling more connected to the place with each story. The farmhouse was no longer just a building, it was a living memory, a connection between past and present. Through all of this, she remained humble and patient. She understood that the farmhouse had been ignored for a reason. It required someone willing to see its potential, someone willing to work hard and invest time. She also realized that her siblings' laughter had less power than she once thought. They could mock her now, but in the future, it would be clear who had the courage and determination to turn a forgotten house into something beautiful. Evening after evening, she sat on the porch, reflecting on the day's work and planning for tomorrow. The farmhouse had taught her resilience, patience, and the importance of seeing value where others do not. It had reminded her of her family's history, her mother's wisdom, and her own strength. Each discovery, each repaired room, each cleared field became a step toward a future she could be proud of. By the end of the second month, the farmhouse had started to feel like a home. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, the garden was growing, and small improvements made the rooms warmer and more inviting. She no longer felt the sting of her siblings' laughter as sharply. She knew that she had chosen well, even when it seemed impossible. The farmhouse, once dismissed as worthless, was becoming a place of hope, of life, and of stories waiting to be told. And she, who had been quiet, overlooked, and underestimated, was finally beginning to feel the power of taking what others had discarded, turning it into something extraordinary. As spring began to take hold, the farmhouse and its land seemed to breathe new life. She woke early each morning, the sun spilling over the horizon and lighting up the fields, giving her a sense of hope she had not known before. The land, once left wild and unkempt, was starting to show its potential. She had learned to read its subtle signs, the softness of the soil, where water collected after rain, which areas held promise for crops and which needed care. It became clear that this farmhouse and the land surrounding it were not as worthless as her siblings had laughed. In fact, it was a treasure in disguise. One morning, while walking along the edges of the property, she discovered an old well partially hidden by overgrown grass. The stones around it were moss-covered, and the wood of the pulley system was cracked and worn. She approached carefully, leaning over to peer into the dark hole. There was water, surprisingly clear, and it seemed deep and plentiful. Her heart quickened. Clean water could make all the difference for planting and sustaining life here. She realized that this was more than just a house. It was a place that could support a whole way of life. If cared for, she began digging deeper into the land's history. Finding old records stored in the farmhouse and scattered throughout the fields, maps from decades past showed the property as highly valued farmland. Letters between her parents and local officials hinted at grants and opportunities for those willing to invest in the land. Even though these papers had been forgotten, they proved something remarkable. The farmhouse and its surroundings had been cared for, nurtured, and intended to flourish. It was as if the past was waiting for someone to see what was hidden all along. Encouraged, she focused on restoration with renewed energy. The roof, which had leaked for years, was slowly repaired. Neighbors helped where they could, lending tools, advice, and even sharing old techniques for mending wooden beams and broken floors. She learned to patch the walls, sand the floors, and restore windows so that sunlight could stream in without obstruction. Each task was slow and required patience, but each small victory brought joy and confidence. She felt as if she was not just fixing a house, but honoring the efforts of generations who had lived and worked here. The fields were another challenge. They had been left to nature, full of weeds, tangled grass, and fallen branches. She began by marking small plots, clearing rocks, and breaking up compacted soil. It was exhausting work, and some days she doubted whether she could manage it alone. But the more she worked, the more she understood the land, its rhythms, and what it needed to thrive. She planted seeds in carefully tended rows, watered them, and watched patiently as the first signs of growth emerged. The tiny green shoots brought more hope than anything she had experienced in years. During this time, she also discovered old family documents that revealed surprises about her parents' foresight. Her mother had meticulously kept accounts of crop rotations, garden layouts, and animal care. Her father had plans for irrigation systems and storage barns. Reading through these papers, she felt a deep connection with them. It was as if they had left a blueprint not just for farming, but for life itself. Each instruction, each note became a guide, giving her confidence that the farmhouse and its land were capable of yielding far more than she had imagined. Neighbors continued to take notice. Some came by with curiosity, asking questions about her progress. Others offered advice, sharing memories of how the land had been maintained decades ago. One elderly farmer even brought an old plow, showing her how to attach it to a small tractor she had purchased. It was hard work, but she was learning quickly. She began to see herself as part of a living story, a caretaker of something much larger than herself. One day, while exploring a hidden corner of the property, she discovered a small orchard, long overgrown and neglected. The trees were twisted, branches intertwined, some broken and others still standing strong. She could imagine the orchard in its prime, the fruit abundant, the trees heavy with apples, pears, and cherries. She carefully pruned the branches, cleared the ground, and started planting new saplings. It was painstaking work, but with each day, the orchard began to feel alive again. Birds returned, insects buzzed through the leaves, and the scent of soil and new growth filled the air. She also found a neglected barn behind the house. Its roof had holes, the doors hung crooked, and the floorboards were splintered. Inside, she discovered old tools, forgotten feed sacks, and the remnants of past animals. She cleaned and organized the barn, mending the structure where she could. She made plans for animals, chickens, goats, perhaps even a cow. Slowly, she could see a future where the farmhouse and land would sustain life, provide food, and offer independence. Evenings were often spent sitting on the porch, reflecting on the day's work and looking out over the land. The stars stretched across the sky, brighter here than in the city or even in the main family home. The silence was not lonely anymore, was peaceful, a companion for her thoughts and dreams. She realized that the farmhouse, which had seemed like a burden, was now giving her something she had never had: space to grow, freedom to make choices, and the chance to see life in its simplest, most honest form. As she continued to work, she began to notice small signs of life returning to the property. Birds nested in the trees, wildflowers bloomed along the edges of the fields, and even rabbits cautiously explored the area near the farmhouse. It was as if the land itself was responding to her care, acknowledging her effort and presence. She felt a sense of responsibility, not just to the house and land, but to everything that lived on it. One afternoon, she discovered an old abandoned well in the orchard, deeper and larger than the one she had found near the house. With effort, she cleared debris and tested the water. It was fresh and clear, a hidden treasure she had not expected. This discovery meant more than practical use. It symbolized the hidden value of the farmhouse and the land. What had been dismissed and forgotten by her siblings held secrets that could sustain life, opportunities they could never see. She also began documenting her progress. She kept a journal, noting repairs, planting schedules, and observations of the land. She drew small sketches, marking where trees, crops, and buildings were located. She wrote down challenges and solutions, creating a living record of the farmhouse's restoration. It became a source of pride, a tangible sign of her hard work and determination. During this period, she occasionally heard from her siblings. They were curious about her efforts, sometimes mocking, sometimes skeptical. But she no longer felt the sting of their words as sharply. She had begun to see that their laughter had little power over the reality she was creating. The farmhouse was no longer a symbol of their scorn, it was a testament to her perseverance and vision. One rainy morning, while sitting by a window with a cup of tea, she realized how far she had come. The kitchen had been repaired, the floors cleaned, and the walls painted. The garden showed signs of life, and the barn was functional. Even the small orchard was beginning to flourish. Each task she had completed felt like a victory. Each improvement a step toward reclaiming something that had been ignored for too long. She thought about her parents often, imagining their pride and guidance. Their lives, their dreams, and their care were embedded in every corner of the farmhouse and every inch of the land. She felt connected to them in a way she had never experienced when they were alive. Their legacy was now intertwined with her efforts, a living, breathing part of the farmhouse's revival. As the days passed, she began to envision a future where the farmhouse and land could do more than sustain her. She imagined inviting neighbors to share in the bounty, teaching others about gardening and farming, and creating a community hub where knowledge and care could be exchanged. She could see events, small gatherings, and celebrations taking place in the farmhouse that had once been empty and silent. The potential seemed limitless. Through all of this, she learned the value of patience, observation, and determination. The farmhouse had taught her that worth is not always obvious, and that hidden treasures often require effort and faith to uncover. She realized that her siblings' laughter had been based on ignorance, not truth. The farmhouse, far from being worthless, held promise, life, and a history that demanded respect. By the end of spring, the farmhouse had transformed. Not completely, not perfectly, but in ways that mattered. It had warmth, life, and hope. The fields, orchard, and garden were beginning to produce, and the house itself felt safe, functional, and welcoming. She had found purpose in the work, joy in small victories, and a sense of accomplishment that could not be measured in money or approval. The farmhouse, once laughed at and dismissed, had become a symbol of her strength, resilience, and vision. And she, once overlooked and underestimated, had found a place where she belonged, a place where she could shape the future while honoring the past. The hidden value of the land and house was no longer hidden, and the quiet determination she had nurtured would continue to grow with each passing day. By the time summer arrived, the farmhouse had begun to reveal its true character. The work she had put in over the spring had transformed it from a forgotten building into a place that held warmth, life, and potential. Windows that had once been broken now opened to sunlight streaming into the rooms, and the floors, though still uneven in places, were solid and clean. The garden bloomed with vegetables and herbs, while the orchard showed signs of fruit forming on its branches. The barn had been repaired enough to shelter a few chickens and goats, and the fields, once wild and untamed, were beginning to look like the kind of productive land her parents had once envisioned. Word of her efforts began to spread. Neighbors stopped by more frequently, offering advice, tools, and encouragement. Some were simply curious, peeking over the fence to see what she was doing. Others brought small gift seeds, plants, or homemade food. Their curiosity slowly shifted to admiration. They began to recognize her dedication, her patience, and her ability to turn what they had once considered a lost cause into a thriving property. One afternoon, a local land surveyor visited. She had reached out to him after discovering some old maps and documents that hinted at the hidden value of the land. The surveyor walked the property, measuring plots, studying the soil, and examining the old farmhouse and barn. After hours of work, he turned to her with a look of genuine surprise. "This land is valuable," he said. "Much more than anyone would expect at first glance. The soil is rich, perfect for crops. Some of this land could even qualify for grants or development projects if you wanted to pursue it." Her heart raced. It was one thing to feel proud of her hard work. It was another to hear that the farmhouse and land had real, tangible worth. She realized that what her siblings had laughed at was actually a hidden treasure. Their mockery now felt empty, insignificant, compared to the truth she had uncovered. With this knowledge, she began to think strategically. She had already restored parts of the farmhouse and the land, but now she had the opportunity to expand her efforts in a way that could secure her future. She planned larger gardens, improved irrigation systems, and began researching what crops would grow best in the different fields. She also considered ways to use the farmhouse itself, perhaps as a rental property, a small workshop, or even a community gathering place. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time, she allowed herself to dream bigger than she ever had. Her siblings, however, remained in the background. They had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was making progress, that the farmhouse and land were no longer the joke they had assumed. Some reached out, subtly asking questions about her plans, while others tried to downplay their curiosity. It was clear they were beginning to realize that their initial laughter had been premature. Despite this, she focused on her work rather than their reactions. She repaired the farmhouse roof completely, replaced broken shutters, and installed new doors. Inside, she painted walls in warm, inviting colors, and rearranged the furniture she had found, making the space functional and comfortable. The kitchen became a place of life again, filled with the smells of cooking and the warmth of sunlight. Each improvement brought a sense of accomplishment and pride, a reminder that she had chosen the right path. The garden flourished, producing fresh vegetables and herbs that she could use immediately and preserve for later. The orchard, once neglected and twisted, now began to bear small fruits, attracting birds and bees that helped pollinate the plants. The barn sheltered her animals, who provided eggs, milk, and companionship. The fields, once overgrown, were now ready for planting larger crops. Each day brought new work and new satisfaction. She also began to reach out to the community. She invited neighbors to help with planting and harvesting, offering guidance to anyone willing to learn. The farmhouse became a place where knowledge and experience were shared, where people could come together to help one another. Slowly, the property began to feel like more than just a home. It became a hub of activity, a place of life and connection. One day, while walking through the orchard, she noticed a section of land that seemed particularly fertile. She remembered the old maps she had found and compared them to the soil conditions. It was ideal for a small vineyard or a larger vegetable plot. Excited, she began preparing the land, clearing weeds, tilling the soil, and planning the layout. She imagined rows of healthy plants, the satisfaction of tending them, and the joy of seeing them grow. It was hard work, but it was rewarding. And each day she felt more connected to the land and her efforts, as the farmhouse and land continued to improve. She started to see changes in herself as well. The hard work, long days, and constant attention required discipline, patience, and resilience. She became stronger, more confident, and more capable of making decisions that affected her life and future. The farmhouse had not only become a home, but also a teacher, showing her the value of persistence, careful planning, and respect for the land. Occasionally, she received messages from her siblings, asking how things were going or expressing surprise at her progress. Some tried to offer advice or subtly suggest changes. She listened politely, but stayed focused on her vision. She knew that their earlier laughter had been based on ignorance and that they could not understand the journey she was on. Their opinions no longer held the power to sway her. The farmhouse also began to reveal hidden surprises. One morning, while clearing an old storage shed, she discovered a collection of antique tools and farming equipment. They were worn and rusted, but many could be restored and used. She spent hours cleaning and repairing them, learning techniques that had been forgotten. Each tool had a story, a purpose, and a place in the restoration of the land. It was another reminder that the farmhouse and its surroundings had value beyond what anyone had imagined. Her animals thrived under her care. Chickens laid eggs regularly, goats provided milk, and a few rabbits she had rescued from nearby fields multiplied quickly. She learned to manage their needs, ensuring they had food, shelter, and safety. Caring for the animals taught her patience, observation, and responsibility. They became companions, offering comfort and a sense of accomplishment that made the long, hot summer days feel shorter and more fulfilling. By midsummer, the farmhouse and land were starting to attract attention. People from nearby towns came to see the improvements, curious about her work and inspired by what she had accomplished. Some offered help, others asked for advice, and a few even suggested opportunities for selling produce or renting space for workshops. She realized that the farmhouse, once ignored and laughed at, had become a place of potential income, connection, and influence. Despite the growing recognition, she remained humble and focused. She knew that true progress required consistency and care. She spent her days tending the fields, repairing structures, planting new crops, and caring for animals. Evenings were reserved for planning, reflecting, and learning. She read books on farming, gardening, and home restoration, incorporating new ideas into her efforts. Every day brought a new challenge and a new opportunity to improve. The farmhouse itself seemed to respond to her efforts. Windows opened smoothly, doors closed without creaking, and rooms that had once felt dark and cold now radiated warmth and life. The land thrived under her attention, with healthy crops, blooming flowers, and active wildlife. The entire property seemed to transform with her presence, proving that patience, hard work, and care could change even the most neglected spaces into thriving environments. She also began to consider long-term plans. The farmhouse could serve as more than a home. It could become a community space, a small business, or a hub for local gatherings. She thought about hosting workshops on gardening and farming, inviting neighbors and students to learn and share knowledge. She imagined festivals, harvest celebrations, and small markets where produce from her fields could be sold. The potential was enormous. She felt a growing sense of purpose and responsibility. Throughout all of this, she never forgot the initial laughter of her siblings. At first, it had stung deeply, leaving her feeling small and dismissed. But now, seeing the results of her efforts and the value she had uncovered, that laughter felt distant, irrelevant, and powerless. She realized that their mockery had no hold over her future or the life she was building. The farmhouse, which they had dismissed, had given her something far greater than approval or validation. It had given her independence, knowledge, and the ability to create a life on her own terms. By the end of summer, the farmhouse had transformed dramatically. The garden and orchard flourished, the barn was functional, the fields productive, and the house itself warm and inviting. Her hard work had created a space that was not only livable, but full of promise. The farmhouse had become a symbol of resilience, determination, and hidden value. And she, who had once been overlooked and underestimated, now stood as a testament to what care, patience, and hard work could achieve. The farmhouse, once the object of laughter, had become a place of growth, opportunity, and inspiration. She had discovered its hidden value and unlocked its potential, proving that what others dismiss as worthless can sometimes be the most precious of all. Her siblings' smiles, once mocking, had faded, replaced by curiosity and perhaps even a hint of regret. But she no longer needed their approval. She had found something far more valuable, the satisfaction of transforming a forgotten place into a home, a livelihood, and a future filled with possibility. By the time autumn rolled in, the farmhouse had completely transformed. What had once been a derelict building surrounded by overgrown fields was now a thriving home filled with warmth, life, and a sense of accomplishment that no one could deny. The garden, orchard, and fields were productive, with crops ripening and fruit swelling on the trees. The barn housed healthy chickens and goats, and the farmhouse itself radiated a sense of care, comfort. In history, she had come to understand that the farmhouse was more than just a physical space. It was a symbol of resilience, of patience, and of seeing potential where others saw only neglect. Each room, each field, each tool had a story, and she had become part of that story, weaving her own efforts into the legacy left by her parents and ancestors. It was a life built on quiet determination and respect for the work that had come before. News of her accomplishments began to spread beyond the neighboring farms. People came from towns over to see the transformation. Curious about how one person had managed to turn a forgotten farmhouse into a thriving, productive property, they asked questions, shared stories, and offered help. Some were inspired to start their own projects, while others simply admired the dedication and patience she had shown to her siblings. Of course, had heard about these developments. Their initial laughter and mockery were now replaced with surprise, curiosity, and, in some cases, regret. Some reached out, pretending to be supportive, asking about her plans, and even offering advice. But she had learned over the months that their interest did not matter. She no longer needed validation from those who had dismissed her. Her satisfaction came from the work itself and the life she had built. One afternoon, she received a visitor she did not expect, a distant cousin, who had heard about the farmhouse's restoration. The cousin walked through the property, examining the fields, garden, and orchard, then turned to her with wide eyes. "This is incredible," the cousin said. "I can't believe how much you've done. The house, the land, it's all coming alive. Your parents would be so proud." Hearing this, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It was more than just praise, it was recognition of the effort, care, and vision she had put into transforming the farmhouse. She realized that the farmhouse had not only changed her life, but had begun to inspire others as well. She also continued to make discoveries that deepened her connection to the land and the family who had come before her. In a hidden compartment in the barn, she found old ledgers detailing crop yields and animal care from decades ago. Some pages were yellowed and fragile, but they offered insight into methods that had worked long before modern technology existed. She studied them carefully, learning how to maximize the potential of the land. While respecting its natural rhythms, the farmhouse became a hub for community learning. She began inviting neighbors and local students to help with planting, harvesting, and restoration projects. She taught them what she had learned about soil care, crop rotation, and sustainable living. The farmhouse, once mocked and neglected, now served a purpose far beyond what anyone could have imagined. It had become a place of education, inspiration, shared effort. Her own confidence and independence grew with each passing day. She handled repairs, planning, and management of the land with ease. She negotiated small sales of produce, arranged for equipment maintenance, and planned for seasonal planting. The farmhouse had taught her discipline, patience, and leadership, showing her that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon and feeling the breeze carry the scents of the fields and orchard. She often reflected on the journey she had taken from the day her siblings laughed at her for taking the old farmhouse, to the moment she realized the hidden value of the land, to the daily work that had turned neglect into abundance. Each moment had taught her something important about resilience, perception, and the rewards of dedication. As harvest time approached, she carefully collected fruits, vegetables, and eggs, documenting yields and planning for the next season. Each successful harvest reinforced her belief that the farmhouse and land were not only valuable, but capable of providing independence and security. The work was hard, but the results were tangible, visible, and deeply satisfying. She also took time to honor the memories of her parents and ancestors. She organized the old journals, letters, and photographs she had found, creating a small archive within the farmhouse. Each piece told a story, a glimpse into the lives of those who had lived and worked on the land. By preserving these memories, she felt a connection to her heritage, a sense of continuity and purpose that went beyond the physical work of restoration throughout this period. Her siblings remained in the background, occasionally making contact or inquiring about the property, but their opinions no longer held sway. She had learned that validation from others was fleeting and often unreliable. The farmhouse had given her something far more lasting: independence, a sense of achievement, and the knowledge that she could create value where others saw none. One crisp autumn morning, she took a walk through the fields, the garden, and the orchard. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden light over the property. She stopped at the orchard, looking at the small fruits beginning to ripen, the trees standing tall despite years of neglect. She thought about the work it had taken to reach this point and the lessons she had learned along the way. The farmhouse had become a place of transformation, not just for the land, but for herself. She had discovered patience, resilience, and the ability to see value where others could not. She had created a life of purpose, independence, and fulfillment. The laughter of her siblings, once so sharp and cutting, was now a distant memory. Replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, she began to envision the future in a new way. The farmhouse and land could continue to grow, providing sustenance, education, and inspiration. She could host workshops, share knowledge with neighbors, and expand the garden and orchard to produce even more. The possibilities were endless. She felt a deep sense of excitement and responsibility. By the time the first leaves fell from the trees, the farmhouse stood proudly against the backdrop of autumn colors. The land was productive, the house warm and inviting, and the orchard full of promise. She had turned a place once dismissed as worthless into a thriving, valuable property. More importantly, she had discovered her own strength, independence, and vision. The farmhouse, once the subject of ridicule, had become a symbol of perseverance, hidden value, and personal triumph. She had taken what others laughed at and transformed it into something meaningful and enduring. Her siblings' smiles had faded long ago, replaced by the undeniable reality of her accomplishments. As she stood on the porch, looking out over the fields and orchard, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The farmhouse had given her more than a home. It had given her purpose, confidence, and the knowledge that she could face any challenge. The land, the house, and the legacy of her family had all been restored. And in the process, she had restored herself. The farmhouse would continue to grow and evolve under her care. It would remain a place of life, learning, and opportunity. And she, once overlooked and underestimated, would remain its guardian, its steward, and its heart. The laughter of her siblings had no place here. Instead, there was quiet pride, satisfaction, and the enduring knowledge that she had turned a forgotten house into a home, a livelihood, and a future full of possibilities.